O believers, remember God with abundant remembrance and glorify Him morning and evening. So when you hear those words, what exactly do you see?
Yeah, you probably picture a quiet room, someone sitting in the corner, eyes closed.
Right, maybe holding a rosary, seeking inner peace by just softly chanting divine names. I mean, we've basically been conditioned from birth to hear a phrase like abundant remembrance and just immediately categorize it.
Exactly. It's categorized as a liturgical instruction. It sounds like this perfect recipe for private personal devotion.
But what if that image is just completely historically wrong? What if those words were like never meant for a monastery at all?
Well, that's the thing. What if they were actually this architectural blueprint for, surviving a terrifying military siege and building an entire socioeconomic system?
And that is the exact paradigm shift we are looking at today. We're doing a deep dive into a lecture delivered in January 1980 by the Islamic scholar and philosopher Allama Ghulam Ahmad Parvez.
Right, and he focuses on Surah Al-Ahzab, that's chapter 33 of the Quran, specifically verses 41 through 44. And his entire mission here is to just strip away centuries of accumulated religious sentimentality.
He argues that reading these verses as some sort of checklist for chanting is, frankly, a fundamental misinterpretation.
He really does. Parwez presents this fiercely rational, structural reading where these verses act as a pragmatic constitutional directive. It's about how human beings are supposed to organize society, especially in times of ultimate crisis.
Let's lay the groundwork for this, because you really cannot understand Parwez without understanding this very specific and honestly tragic historical premise that his whole worldview rests upon.
Yeah, he argues that the history of the Muslim world is defined by this transformation of a deen into a mazhab.
Which are heavy terms, right?
Okay.
So let's define the actual mechanics of what he means there. What is a deen?
Well, the distinction is everything. In his reading, a deen is a comprehensive socioeconomic and political system. You can think of it as a constitutional framework.
Like an actual operational way of life.
Exactly. It dictates the objective laws governing everything, from how wealth is distributed to prevent monopolies, to how justice works in a courtroom, to how society protects its most vulnerable people.
So it requires statecraft, it requires economics and law. It's not just a feeling.
Right. It is highly operational, whereas mazhab, on the other hand, is what we understand today as religion in the modern Western sense.
Like a collection of private dogmas.
Yeah, personal beliefs, individual rituals. A mazhab operates in your heart or, in your place of worship, but it doesn't fundamentally challenge the economic structure of the state.
So the real tragedy, according to Parwez, is that the original Quranic blueprint was this dynamic functioning system, a deen. But over centuries, it was just hollowed out.
Completely hollowed out and reduced to a mazhab. The physical shapes of the system remained intact. Sure, people still perform the motions.
He still memorized the text. They still say the exact same words.
But the socioeconomic results that the system was engineered to produce, things like total equity, wiping out poverty, eliminating fear, those are entirely gone.
It's like the shell is there, but someone removed the engine.
It's exactly like that. I mean, it's the difference between having a functioning hospital that actively cures disease and having a group of people who just walk around a ruined hospital wearing stethoscopes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Just chanting medical terminology, hoping it magically makes them healthy.
Right. The outward identifiers are preserved, but the inner machinery is completely dead. And that brings us directly to the concept of dhikr.
Which is the Arabic word used in verse 41 for remembrance.
Yes. When the Quran says, remember God abundantly, Parwez insists this just cannot possibly mean sitting in a state of trance, repeating words without understanding them.
I found his analogy of the man named Abdullah incredibly clarifying for this. Because Abdullah literally translates to servant of God, right?
Right. So Parwez says, imagine a man who calls himself Abdullah. It's printed on his passport. It's on his birth certificate. He introduces himself as Abdullah to everyone he meets.
But in his actual day-to-day life, his actions show zero servitude to any divine law.
Zero. He serves his own ego. He hoards wealth. He participates in corrupt systems. He exploits his workers.
So if you ask Parwez, does calling yourself Abdullah 1,000 times a day make you a servant of God?
The answer is a definitive no. It has just become this national identity marker. It's a cultural name tag that's been totally divorced from its active meaning.
The repetition of the label does not manifest the reality.
Exactly.
But I have to stop you there, though, because this sounds incredibly cynical. If remembrance If Dhikr is not verbal repetition, if it isn't sitting with a rosary, what exactly is it?
It's a fair point to raise.
Because Parwez is basically arguing that centuries of spiritual meditation, of everyday people finding genuine comfort in reciting these names, is just entirely missing the point. So if I'm not supposed to be chanting, how exactly do I remember abundantly?
Well, to answer that, we really have to pull the camera back. We have to look at the situational backdrop of these specific verses because context dictates meaning here.
Right. Surah Al-Ahzab wasn't revealed to people sitting peacefully in a garden,
Not at all. It was revealed during the Battle of the Trench.
which was an absolute nightmare scenario. I mean, this wasn't just some minor skirmish.
It was a moment of supreme existential terror. The early Muslim community in Medina was completely surrounded.
By a massive coalition of opposing armies, right? Numbering around, what, 10,000 highly equipped soldiers?
Yeah, about 10,000. And they had laid siege to the city, which only had about 3,000 defenders. So to survive, the defenders had to dig this massive trench around the exposed sides of Medina.
And you really have to understand the physical reality of this. They were digging through solid rock in the freezing cold of winter.
Facing extreme starvation. There are accounts of them tying stones to their stomachs just to suppress the hunger pangs.
It's just a claustrophobic, terrifying environment. You are freezing in a ditch you haven't eaten in days.
And an overwhelming enemy force is camped just a few hundred yards away, actively looking for a weak point to break through and just slaughter everyone you love.
And in the absolute epicenter of that paralyzing fear, the directive comes down. Remember God with abundant remembrance.
Now, apply the liturgical definition to that moment.
Right.
If you read that as a command for personal devotion, it is clinically insane. When arrows are raining down and cavalry is charging the trench, you don't drop your spear, sit down in the dirt, close your eyes, and start softly chanting divine names.
I mean, that would be mass suicide. You'd be wiped out in 5 minutes.
Precisely. Therefore, Parwez deduces Dhikrullah, the remembrance of God, must mean something structurally entirely different.
So what does it mean to him?
For him, it means the continuous active orientation of one's choices, conduct, and social relationships toward the divine law, especially in times of severe crisis.
Wow. So it is about maintaining your operational alignment with the system you have committed to, even when every biological instinct in your body is just screaming at you to panic.
Or to abandon your post or compromise your principles just to survive. Yes. Systemic orientation is the perfect phrase for it.
It's almost like a soldier's training.
It is. When an ambush happens, a highly trained soldier doesn't sit and meditate on the concept of the military manual.
Right. They instantly recall the operational protocols and execute them under fire.
Exactly. So abundant remembrance means making this conscious alignment the governing constant of your daily life.
So when you are about to make a decision, whether you are holding a defensive line in a trench or, negotiating a contract in a boardroom or dealing with a crisis in your community, you pause.
You pause and you actively recall what the objective law dictates for that specific scenario, and then you execute it.
It's not a punctual religious act you perform for 5 minutes a day.
No, it is the continuous state of being highly conscious of the laws you are operating under.
And Parwez connects this directly to the second part of verse 41, right? The command to glorify him morning and evening.
Yes. The Arabic word used there is tasbih. And once again, he takes a total sledgehammer to the traditional definition.
He completely strips away the imagery of tasbih being the act of, moving beads on a string.
To find the real meaning, he bypasses centuries of theological commentary entirely. He goes straight to classical Arabic root words.
And what does the root actually say?
The root of tasbih carries the connotation of swimming swiftly, of maintaining buoyancy in deep water, or moving forward with immense continuous effort.
So glorifying God in this socioeconomic blueprint means engaging in an intense, relentless struggle to complete the program assigned by the system.
Exactly. It is waking up in the morning and putting your shoulder to the wheel. It's the active, physical, and intellectual effort required to build and protect a just society.
Meaning you're swimming against the current of human greed and tyranny, and you just cannot stop paddling.
But, of course, this immediately raises a highly contentious point.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oh.
Because when people hear Parwez completely dismantle the traditional understandings of Dhikr and Tasbih, reducing them from spiritual practices to socioeconomic struggles, the immediate backlash is pretty obvious.
Does he want us to stop praying? Does he think all traditional Islamic rituals are totally useless?
Which is a completely fair question. I mean, if the inner machinery of the ritual is dead, as he claims, why keep performing the empty motion?
Right.
I'd imagine a lot of people reading his work might just decide to throw the rituals out entirely.
And that is exactly what some people tried to do, which actually infuriated Parwez. We have to report his stance on this impartially because it is incredibly nuanced and honestly very often misunderstood.
So what did he actually do? Did he pray?
Parvez himself prayed in the traditional manner. He urged his followers to keep the national Islamic rituals, the physical forms of prayer, fasting, the pilgrimage, completely intact.
Wait, why though?
Yeah.
If he just spent an hour arguing that these actions don't magically solve societal problems, why enforce them?
Because of the concept of the national identity marker we mentioned earlier with the Abdullah analogy.
Oh, right, the cultural name tag.
Exactly.
Ah.
Parwez viewed the Muslim world in the modern era as a distinct global community, a nation. And these physical rituals were the shared cultural and historical fabric that kept this highly diverse community unified.
So if a Muslim from Indonesia and a Muslim from Morocco meet, they have a shared structural practice. They recognize each other.
Yes, he was fiercely protective of maintaining that unity. He strictly forbade his followers from inventing new, reformed ways to pray or breaking away to form new sects. He believed you never tear down the physical structure of a community.
He just wanted them to realize that the structure alone wasn't going to save them.
Right.
Because I was reading through this 1980 lecture, and he gets visibly frustrated with people who use his intellectual critiques as a loophole to abandon their duties.
Oh, yeah. He talks about people who are just lazy. They skip their community prayers, and then when someone calls them out, they say, oh, well, Allama Parwez says it's all just rituals anyway, so I don't need to do it.
And he has a brilliant retort for that. He tells those people, don't fire your gun from my shoulder.
Yes. He basically says, if you are lethargic, admit you are lethargic. But do not weaponize my structural analysis of the Quran to justify your lack of discipline.
His point was never that rituals should be discarded. His point was that true worship is validated solely by its socioeconomic results.
Which is a really tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
So let's test that theory. What does a socioeconomic result look like when you were talking about prayer? Because, we usually measure prayer by how peaceful it makes us feel individually.
Well, Parwez points out that the Quran explicitly claims that true connection to the system actively prevents a society from falling into obscenity and societal evil.
It creates a community where wealth is circulated fairly, where justice is blind, where people are genuinely secure.
And Parwez's critique was a brutal diagnostic test. He looked at the global Muslim world in 1980 and essentially said, look out the window.
Right.
We are performing the physical motions of prayer in the tens of millions every single day. We are chanting the words perfectly, yet our societies are plagued by deep corruption, massive wealth inequality, political tyranny, and extreme exploitation.
The logic there is kind of inescapable. If the input is supposedly perfect, but the output is disastrous, the system is fundamentally broken. The machinery is decoupled from the wheels.
Exactly. So if we establish that Zikr and Tasbih represent the immense on-the-ground human effort required to align with and build the system, that's the human input, right? The next logical question is, what is the divine response? If human beings are putting in this agonizing operational effort in the trench, what exactly is the system giving them in return?
Is God just watching from afar, cheering them on?
Right, which brings us to Parwez's most controversial structural reading found in verse 43.
Let me read verse 43. It states, "It is he who sends salawat upon you and his angels to bring you out of darkness into light."
Yeah.
Now, practically every English translation of the Quran translates the word salawat as blessings. God sends blessings upon you.
Which is what everyone is used to hearing.
Culturally, people think of God and the angels reciting darud, which is a Persian term for specific prayer of blessing over the believers.
And Parwez rejects this translation completely. He argues that it is structurally and logically incoherent within the framework of a functioning deen.
How so?
To understand his reasoning, you really have to look at his methodology. Parwez cross-references the Quran to let the text explain itself.
Okay.
He notes that here in verse 43, God and his angels send salawat upon the believers. But later in the same chapter, in verse 56, the text says, God and his angels send salawat upon the prophet, and it commands the believers to do the exact same thing.
Oh, I see. And this is where the traditional definition creates a massive logical paradox for Parwez.
Exactly. If salawat merely means reciting a verbal blessing, then you are asking us to picture a scenario where God, the infinite creator of the cosmos, is sitting up in heaven, verbally reciting blessings upon human beings.
Parwez asks this incredibly uncomfortable question. Does an omnipotent God sit and recite words?
Right. Furthermore, if believers are supposed to send salawat on the prophet, does that just mean whispering his name with a blessing attached?
It reduces the divine, the angels, and the human beings to these entirely passive clerical roles, just reading scripts at each other.
Yes. So to find the actual meaning, Parwez again goes straight to classical Arabic lexicons.
I actually looked up what Imam Raqib's famous dictionary says about the root of salawat, and it honestly blew my mind.
What did you find?
It has absolutely nothing to do with whispering blessings. According to classical Arabic roots, the verb form means to provide moral support, to back someone up, to enable them, to praise their efforts, to ensure the success of their program, and to protect it from breaking down. It is an intensely active logistical word.
Let's apply that to the commander-in-chief analogy we used for the Battle of the Trench. You are that soldier, freezing, starving, holding the defensive line. Your commander-in-chief is back at headquarters.
Does an effective commander just sit in a warm tent, close his eyes, and send blessings to the troops?
If he does, they all die.
Exactly. A real commander-in-chief provides logistical backing, he sends reinforcements, he ensures the supply lines for food, and weapons are open.
He sends a clear message saying, I see your struggle, I am backing you completely, hold the line because operational support is moving on your behalf right now.
That is salawat in Parwez's reading. It is the active, operational backing of a higher power.
Yes. When verse 43 says God sends salawat, it means God is throwing the full, unyielding weight of divine backing behind your socioeconomic program.
And when it says the angels send salawat?
Well, Parwez, who consistently interprets angels as the operational forces of nature and the cosmos, argues this means that the natural and social forces of the universe are actively aligning to ensure your success.
But this divine backing is not a blank check, right? I mean, you don't just get it by simply existing.
No, it is entirely conditional. This is a core pillar of Parwez's philosophy, drawing on Surah 47, verse 7, which establishes a very strict sequence. If you help God, God will help you.
So God does not intervene to do the heavy lifting for you while you sleep.
God's salawat, the systemic backing, is only activated after human beings have stood up, made the agonizing effort, and align themselves with the system. You have to start digging the trench before the reinforcements arrive.
Which brings up a massive historical question. If the original Arabic text was this action-oriented, this dynamic and operational, how on earth did it become so passive?
It's a huge shift.
How did a word that means operational backing devolve into whispering a blessing? Parwez has a socio-historical thesis for this that is fascinating, though definitely highly controversial.
And we need to look at this purely as his historical argument because it perfectly illustrates his frustration. Parwez argues that this linguistic shift turning active systemic terms into passive chanting was not an accident of time.
What does he think it was?
He claims it was the result of a subtle, long-term linguistic hijacking by the Zoroastrian or Majusi elite of the Persian Empire after they were conquered by the early Arab Muslims.
The mechanics of how he describes this are fascinating. His argument is essentially that the Persian Empire couldn't defeat the early Muslims on the battlefield.
Because the Muslim system, the deen, was too robust, it was economically fair, which gave it mass appeal, and it was militarily incredibly successful.
So the Persian elite realized that a frontal military assault just wouldn't work. To dismantle the Islamic system, they had to attack the software, not the hardware.
But they had a problem. They couldn't alter the physical text of the Quran. The Arabic words were memorized by thousands. They were strictly guarded and structurally locked. You couldn't just erase a verse.
So what did they do?
According to Parwez, they executed a brilliant sociological maneuver. They changed the meanings of the words without changing the shapes.
Wait, how exactly does a conquered empire change the dictionary of its conquerors? It sounds like a conspiracy theory until you actually look at how administrations work.
Parwez maps it out sociologically. As the Persian Empire was absorbed, its highly educated bureaucratic class, the scribes, the administrators, the scholars, converted and integrated into the Islamic Empire.
They became the civil servants.
Exactly, and eventually the religious commentators of the new state. Parwez claims that as they integrated, they brought their pre-Islamic, passive, ritualistic, religious concepts with them.
And over generations, they kept the Arabic shapes. Words like salat, which originally meant connection or following the system.
And sawim, which meant abstinence and control.
And salawat, meaning backing.
Right. They kept those words but hollowed them out and fed them with Persian theological concepts.
They effectively turned the operational vocabulary of a state into the mystical vocabulary of a religion.
And he points out a glaring proof of this in the modern Muslim world. In places like South Asia, people don't even use the Arabic words for these practices in their daily lives. They use the Persian equivalents.
They don't say salat, they say namaz.
Right. They don't say samwam, they say roza. And for salawat, they use the Persian word darood.
And for Parwez, this isn't just a harmless linguistic translation. It is a conceptual takeover.
Namaz and darood are deeply passive concepts inherited from ancient Persian religion. By swapping the operational definitions for these passive ones, Parwez argues, the revolutionary action-oriented system of the Quran was completely neutralized.
The deen was successfully turned back into a mazhab.
Again, while this is his specific historical thesis and highly debated, it explains exactly why he is so obsessive about returning to the classical Arabic roots. He is trying to recover the stolen operational manual.
Okay, so let's tie this recovered manual back to the verses. You are in the trench. You are consciously aligning your actions with the system. That is Zikr. You are struggling continuously to execute the program. That is Tasbih. Because you are doing this, the divine system and the operational forces of the cosmos activate to back you up and ensure your success. That is Salawat.
That's the formula.
But what is the ultimate goal of all this immense effort and cosmic backing? Where is this all leading?
Verse 43 gives us the destination clearly, to bring you out of darkness into light.
From darkness into light. I mean, it's a phrase used in almost every religion on earth. It sounds beautiful. It sounds poetic.
But knowing Parwez, he isn't being poetic here at all. He doesn't view this as a sentimental metaphor about, feeling happy instead of sad or reaching enlightenment.
Not at all. He approaches it like a structural engineer. And to understand what he means by darkness and light, we really have to look at the exact grammar of the Arabic text.
Grammar is key here.
The word used for darkness is zulumat. It is distinctly plural, darknesses. But the word for light is newer, which is strictly singular. Light.
That distinction is crucial. There are multiple overlapping darknesses, but only one unified light.
So what exactly are the darknesses?
Parwez uses another part of the Quran as a cipher to decode this. He points to Surah 14, which recounts the story of Moses and Pharaoh.
Right.
In that story, God commands Moses to lead his people out of the Zulumat and into the Nur.
And if we look at the brutal reality of Moses' situation in Egypt, the Israelites weren't sitting in a literal dark room. The Zulumat they experienced were highly specific structural oppressions.
Exactly. Parwez breaks down the architecture of their tyranny into 4 pillars.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, there was political tyranny embodied by the absolute dictatorship of Pharaoh, who claimed ultimate sovereignty over human lives.
Second, there was religious exploitation, represented in the text by Haman, the high priest. He used religious dogma to keep the people docile and subservient to the state.
Third, there was severe economic oppression. The Israelites were an enslaved, impoverished underclass, forced into hard labor, while the elite hoarded all the wealth.
And the fourth pillar is basically the psychological result of those first 3. A state of constant, pervasive, paralyzing fear.
Right. You put political dictatorship, corrupt religious hierarchies, and economic inequality together, and you generate a society terrified of its own shadow.
So Zulumat, the plural darknesses, are the multiple overlapping systems of human tyranny.
And if that is the plural darkness, what is the singular Nur, the light?
Well, for Parwez, the light is the singular unifying sovereignty of divine law.
It is a socioeconomic system where no human being bows to another human being, where there is no economic exploitation, no priestly class manipulating the masses for profit.
And where the rule of law guarantees justice and equity for absolutely everyone.
It is the emergence from an uninformed, reactive, and oppressed existence into a conscious, law-guided, and free society.
The system literally pulls you from being crushed by the plural darknesses of human tyranny into the singular light of a unified, just reality.
Which leads us to the ultimate culmination of this entire process, described in verse 44. Their greeting on the day they meet him will be peace.
Peace. And again, it's just so easy to read that and immediately picture a sentimental afterlife scenario.
Oh, absolutely. You die, you walk up to the pearly gates, and God greets you and says, "Peace be upon you."
But Parwez grounds this firmly in the psychological reality of the human being living within the deen right here, right now.
Yes. For Parwez, this peace is not a deferred post-mortem reward. It is the immediate, tangible inner state produced by sustained alignment with the divine system.
It's not a greeting. It's the architecture of an unshakable human character.
Yes. Those who live in alignment with the objective law, who practice Dhikr and Tasbih in the mud in the trenches and who receive the operational salawat produce a very particular kind of human being.
It produces a person who meets their existence, their daily challenges, and eventually their final reckoning, without any inner contradiction.
They are not at war with themselves. They have absolute clarity of purpose.
Parwez offers a diagnostic test for this piece, and it is honestly devastatingly brilliant. He bases it on his critique of the global Muslim world in 1980.
And remember the geopolitical context of that time. This was the height of the Cold War.
The Soviet Union had just invaded Afghanistan.
There was massive unrest across the Middle East. The global chessboard was highly volatile.
And Parwez noted how an election in America, or a troop movement by the Soviets in Kabul, would just send absolute tremors of panic throughout the entire Muslim world.
So he asks a question that cuts right to the bone. If a community claims to be living in the light, if they claim to have the ultimate perfected divine system, shouldn't they be absolutely fearless?
It's the ultimate reality check. If you truly have the operational backing of the cosmos, the salawat, why are you terrified of a politician in Washington or a general in Moscow?
Parwez's conclusion is brutal, but totally logical. A community gripped by fear is clearly, objectively still living in the zulumat, the plural darkness.
It simply doesn't matter how many millions of people are perfectly reciting prayers 5 times a day.
It doesn't matter how many millions of times a day the word Nur is chanted on a rosary.
If the socioeconomic and psychological reality of that community is fear, reactivity, and panic, they're in the dark. The machinery is broken.
Because living in true alignment with the divine law produces a human being without fear. It produces a society that is a rock in the middle of a stormy ocean.
If you are constantly reacting to the winds of global politics with panic, you have not achieved the peace described in verse 44. You haven't built the structure. You are just wearing the Abdullah name tag.
So if we pull all of this together and look at the bigger picture, what Parwez has done is truly remarkable.
It really is.
He has taken 4 short verses that the world has read for centuries as a simple checklist for daily devotion, and he has synthesized them into a profound, rigorous, structural equation for human development.
Let's lay that structural equation out clearly for the listener, because this is the core takeaway of this entire deep dive.
Step 1, consciousness of the system. There. You must constantly, actively align your choices with the objective laws of the system you have committed to, especially under pressure.
Step 2, immense effort.
Tasbih.
You must struggle continuously to execute that program.
Step 3, supported by the system, salawat. If you engage in that continuous struggle, the operational forces of the system and the universe itself will activate to back you up, provide logistics, and ensure your success.
Step 4, emergence. This process pulls you out of the plural darknesses of human tyranny, fear, and exploitation, and into the singular light of a unified, just reality.
And finally, step 5, arrival. The ultimate product of this process is peace, an unshakable inner state, and a fearless society without contradiction.
Parwez's ultimate contribution here is forcing a massive paradigm shift in how we read ancient texts. He is arguing that the Quran is not asking for blind devotion.
It is not a book of magic spells.
And is not a collection of comforting chants designed to make you feel good while the world burns. It is describing a developmental socio-economic process. It is a pragmatic instruction manual for building a specific kind of world and a specific kind of human being.
It changes how you read every other command in the text. For example, when verse 56 commands believers to send salawat on the prophet, Parwez is saying it doesn't mean sit in a circle and recite blessings.
Right. It means join God and the operational forces of the universe in actively supporting the prophet's socio-economic program.
Stand up, lend your physical and intellectual strength, protect the system, and submit to its laws without any inner resistance.
It is a call to action, not a call to meditation. And honestly, whether you are deeply religious, culturally Muslim, or entirely secular, the underlying psychological and structural concept here of systemic alignment is incredibly profound.
It really applies across the board.
Think about your own life, your own work, your own communities. Are the actions you take every day just rituals? Are you just going through the motions on autopilot, hoping that somehow, magically, your habits will produce a good result?
Or are you consciously, actively aligning every choice with the ultimate goals you want to achieve? It challenges us to ask, are you demanding that the system back you up, hoping for a lucky break, hoping for a promotion, hoping for a peaceful life, without first putting in the intense, continuous struggle to build the foundations?
Because Parwez's reading suggests that the universe does not reward passive chanting. It rewards structural alignment.
Absolutely.
So the next time you find yourself hoping for blessings or good luck to solve a crisis, ask yourself, what system am I actively building right now? Because according to this reading, true peace isn't something you simply ask for. It's the architecture you build through your daily conscious actions.